You cut my power during a hurricane, but forgot I control the entire grid. Lightning illuminates the sky as I stand drenched on my porch, screaming at Karen. She smirks from her glowing veranda, cocoa steaming in her perfectly manicured hand. Rules are rules, she purrs. My teeth clench as water drips into my eyes. Let her enjoy this little victory. She doesn't realize the storm outside is nothing compared to the one I'm about to unleash. By sunrise, her perfect HOA empire will be in the dark. Tonight, one woman thought she could freeze me out of my own home. By dawn, she'd learned the hard way, never tick off the person who controls the power. I was cold, soaked to the bone, and standing in what should have been the warmth of my home. That single moment, me, flashlight in hand, my hair plastered to my forehead, feet numb against the hardwood, was the moment it all began. I'd stepped inside only to discover my house was as black as the night sky beyond the windows. No hum from the fridge, no flicker from the overhead lamps. My smart thermostat had flatlined. The screen was dark. The security system beeped once, then gave up. Outside, the hurricane had unleashed torrents of rain, turning lawns into shallow ponds and streets into flowing rivers. But the neighbor across the street had power. His porch light shone bright. Down the road, the flicker of television screens glowed in living rooms. Only my home stood cloaked in complete darkness. My first thought was an ordinary outage, the kind that hits a single power line in a storm. But a quick glance confirmed every other house around me remained lit. My second guess, maybe a breaker had tripped. I grabbed my phone to pull up the app that monitors my utility connection. The login screen popped up, but as soon as I entered my credentials, I got a cold message I'd never seen before. Access denied. Power service suspended. Contact administrator. Administrator? Suspended? None of it made sense until I noticed a slip of paper plastered to my front gate. I stepped back outside, squinting against the pelting rain, the flashlight beam bouncing off puddles. The slip was enclosed in a plastic sleeve, bold letters across the top reading violation notice. My name was typed neatly, the words unauthorized generator use stamped in red. At the bottom, Karen's signature gleamed like a proud autograph. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association. Karen, who believed her every whim was law, even if it was just in a small suburban cul-de-sac. She'd slapped this notice on my gate, effectively ordering the disconnection of my electricity. That alone might have been galling enough, but she'd done it during a hurricane. She was on her porch, sipping cocoa and watching me shiver in the downpour as though I were the entertainment for the evening. The second I locked eyes with her, she smiled. It was the kind of smile you see on a cat when it's cornered a mouse. I stomped up her walkway, stepping around the decorative potted plants she kept so obsessively aligned. You cut off my power? I demanded. Thunder boomed overhead, rattling the windows in her house. She shrugged, taking another long sip. Rules are rules, she said, her voice so calm it set my teeth on edge. You used a grid-tied generator without filing a request. We have standards. I didn't even switch my backup on. I snapped, water dripping from my forehead. That storm outside would be the only reason to use a generator if I had to. But you can't just kill my power. You don't have that authority. She raised an eyebrow. Don't I? The HOA has full jurisdiction over residential power compliance within our boundaries. You're out of compliance, so we suspended service until you settle your fines. Then she smirked again. If you want your electricity back, fill out the form. For a moment, I was too stunned to answer. My breath came out in ragged bursts, fogging in the rain-cooled air. I realized my entire body was trembling, not just from the cold, but from something far hotter, a simmering fury that spread through my veins. I opened my mouth to shout something else, but the words died on my tongue. Fighting her right then felt pointless. She believed herself invincible, the final boss of this little suburban fiefdom. I turned around and walked back to my house, ignoring the look of victory on her face. Fine, let her gloat. Let her think the hurricane and her petty notice had broken me, because I wasn't just another homeowner. Karen and her HOA cronies had no idea who I was, who they'd just messed with. I locked the front door behind me and peeled off my soaking jacket, dropping it in a heap. The living room was dark, except for the sporadic flashes of lightning that stuttered through the windows. My feet left wet footprints on the hardwood. No heat, no lights, no fridge hum. Nothing. Yet, in that darkness, I found a strange clarity. I felt my way through the hall, then opened a door that led to a private room I seldom used. I reached into my pocket, pressed my thumb against a discreet scanner, and heard the click of an electronic lock opening. The door swung inward, revealing a personal command center lit by the faint glow of inactive monitors. Rows of them arranged along the walls, connected to a powerful system that oversaw more than any HOA could dream of. Because I didn't just work for the regional utility company, I owned it. The entire grid Karen thought she controlled, every power line, every meter, every substation, belonged to the company my grandfather had built decades ago. I became CEO after years of navigating corporate buyouts, expansions, and regulatory hurdles. It wasn't a secret, but it wasn't common knowledge either. I'd moved into this neighborhood for some peace, wanting a quiet house near the ocean. I paid my HOA dues like anyone else and generally kept a low profile. But Karen had found an ancient clause that let the HOA request disconnection under certain compliance concerns. She must have sweet-talked some junior tech or exploited a gap in the system. In normal circumstances, it would never have gone through. It was a paper oversight from acquisitions that had never been updated. A single improbable glitch. And she'd seized it. I could have fixed it with a few keystrokes, restored my power immediately. But a wave of grim satisfaction surged through me. Let my house stay dark. My cold, powerless home would be a monument to Karen's arrogance, a testament to the line she'd crossed. This wasn't about the power to run my house. This was about the power she assumed was hers to wield. Taking a seat before the main console, I began typing, pulling up internal records. The logs showed how, hours earlier, a minor HOA representative used admin credentials to submit a disconnect request. The credentials belonged to Karen, her signature was on file, and the reason cited was unauthorized equipment. My solar backup had evidently triggered a compliance violation warning in their system. Ridiculous. But it had worked. I leaned back, letting that sink in, before I started a silent audit of the entire sector's usage. Karen's home might glow warm and smug now, but soon enough, she'd realize that controlling the neighborhood power supply was infinitely bigger than a local bylaw. She'd declared war on me in the middle of a hurricane, and I was about to show her how that war would be fought. For a few moments, I watched the outside security feed. Sheets of rain slanted across the camera lens, wind flinging tree branches against the fences. Lightning flared, highlighting Karen's silhouette behind her window. I pictured her sipping cocoa, proud of her little triumph. I pictured her believing she'd beaten me into submission. My lips curved into a smile, one as cold as the unheated air around me. "You forgot who built the grid," I whispered, "but you're going to remember soon enough." I let the storm pass without turning my power back on. By the following morning, the hurricane's worst winds had moved on, though heavy rain still drizzled from a dull gray sky. My house was chilly, but I took a quick shower in lukewarm water, threw on fresh clothes, and sat down to plan my first steps. Karen expected me to beg the HOA for relief, pay whatever fine they invented, then promise never to misbehave again. That was her game. Petty dictatorship. And for most people, it worked because no one wants their lights cut. But I wasn't most people, and I was about to show her exactly how large her mistake was. I called the compliance department at my company and instructed them to flag the entire HOA region for a thorough audit. No fanfare, no big announcements, just a quiet reclassification. Any unusual activity in that neighborhood would now be meticulously documented and reported up the chain. Whether it was tampering with meters or unauthorized rewiring, every single glitch would surface. The compliance manager sounded intrigued. Apparently, the area had a history of borderline anomalies, though never enough for a full investigation. Now we had cause. Next, I pulled up our internal communications portal. I drafted a request for a silent investigation into Sector 19B, which covered my entire neighborhood. I wanted usage logs, past complaints, and all the details about who in that HOA had direct lines to request service changes. Karen's name would light up that list like a neon sign. By midday, I had replies confirming that multiple questionable modifications had occurred in the last few months. Chief among them were new meter installations that bypassed certain standard regulations. They were all approved by the same cluster of HOA admins. Karen was in the thick of it. And they must have thought no one would catch on, because for the average homeowner, it's impossible to see these complexities. But from my vantage point, it was as clear as a blueprint. I also noticed something else, a hidden power line bridging from the HOA clubhouse to a private property belonging to Karen's cousin. Something about a high constant load, possibly a crypto mining operation, possibly something even more suspect. The details didn't matter yet. What mattered was that Karen and her circle were knee-deep in power misuse. Late in the afternoon, a new email appeared in my personal inbox, an invitation to the upcoming HOA board meeting. Perfect timing. Usually, I ignored these self-congratulatory gatherings, but this time, I planned to attend. Well, not directly. I had a friend, Nolan, who was as brilliant as he was discreet. He also possessed a face that screamed harmless retiree, despite his razor-sharp intellect. I invited him over for coffee and asked if he'd like to attend a fun little meeting. He gave me a wry grin. What's the catch? I shrugged. You wear a hidden earpiece, I feed you lines, and we watch Karen's empire start to crack. He leaned forward. I love a good show. Day of the board meeting arrived. Karen had set it in the evening, presumably to maximize attendance for her grand pronouncements. The rain had eased, leaving behind a damp chill. Nolan, dressed in his typical cargo shorts and a baseball cap, strolled into the community center like any curious resident. Meanwhile, I remained in my command room, monitoring everything via live drone feed. I discreetly parked the drone a block away, angled so it captured the community hall's interior through a window. Residents filtered in, shaking off umbrellas and chatting in hushed tones. My house was still dark, though the streets around me bustled with normalcy. Karen's face was animated as she stood at the podium, addressing her captive audience. She spoke of new regulations, how the HOA needed more control over power usage during extreme weather, how certain individuals threatened everyone's safety by ignoring bylaws. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew. Nolan raised his hand. Karen's eyes flicked to him, her expression patronizing. Yes, you in the cap? In his earpiece, I whispered, ask if these rules apply to her friends or just to random scapegoats. Nolan obliged, his voice measured. I'm curious. You talk about controlling usage for safety, but does that apply to all homes, including the ones secretly siphoning power? A ripple went through the room. Karen stiffened. The rules, she said, apply equally. We have bylaws that specifically require a licensed professional to handle any grid adjustments, Nolan finished. He pulled a folder from his messenger bag. According to the official HOA charter, no one on this board can authorize disconnection. That must be done by the utility company. So why did you cut power to a resident during a hurricane? Murmurs broke out. Karen's expression twisted. We were enforcing compliance. That homeowner had a generator in violation of Code 8B7. Nolan flipped a page. Actually, there was no generator running. It's also come to our attention that the homeowner's solar system is fully certified and legally installed. So who gave you the authority to override the utility feed? A hush fell. Karen's knuckles turned white against the podium edge. She tried to regain composure. We have special permissions. The HOA is allowed to handle emergencies. Emergencies, Nolan said with a sweet, incredulous tone. Like cutting off only one house while the rest of the neighborhood glows? He tilted his head. That's less of an emergency and more of a personal vendetta. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Then Nolan delivered the next line, one I'd prepared meticulously. Just so everyone here knows, the person you cut off isn't just another neighbor. He's the CEO of the company that powers this entire community. Gasps erupted across the hall. Karen's face lost all color. Someone in the back actually shouted, "Wait, he's the utility boss?" Another resident demanded, "Is that true? You shut off the power of the guy who runs the grid." Karen tried to stammer out a denial, but the damage was done. People began muttering about lawsuits, about how the board had no right. Nolan stepped back, letting the wave of indignation swell. This was just the beginning. The next morning, a furious email from Karen arrived in the utility company's general inbox, demanding to speak to whoever was in charge. It landed right in my lap. I responded with a politely worded form letter, thanking her for her inquiry and letting her know we'd get back to her in the order it was received. Then I sat back in my still cold house, sipping coffee, reading her increasingly frantic follow-ups. By noon, the official reclassification for the HOA had been processed. Their usage rate tripled. An emergency measure triggered when an area repeatedly tampers with power infrastructure. That afternoon, I heard from a friend in the billing department that the HOA's new invoice was over $17,000 in backdated penalties and fees. The invoice attached a breakdown, meter tampering, unauthorized lines, and the big one, violating compliance during a state of emergency, the hurricane. Karen called an emergency meeting that night, but the residents were in uproar. With the new reclassification, everyone's monthly bill soared. Rumors flew in the neighborhood chat groups, some outraged, some darkly amused at Karen's blunder. The entire fiasco had turned the place into a pressure cooker. By the next day, my compliance team had arranged a routine inspection of the HOA's grid connections. We sent out city inspectors who showed up in fluorescent jackets and official vehicles. Karen ran out in a pink bathrobe, yelling that she never approved such an inspection. But the inspectors calmly informed her they had every legal right, given the possible infrastructure violations. It took them only a few hours to uncover all Karen's dirty secrets. An illegally installed line to her cousin's place, bypass smart meters, a suspicious cable rigged to the clubhouse hot tub. The inspectors took photos, made notes, and ignored Karen's protests. One of them asked with a raised eyebrow if raccoons typically installed surge protectors. Karen had no answer. That same evening, the drone feed I had installed outside captured Karen pacing in her yard, phone pressed to her ear. She was yelling something about a fake CEO and how none of this would stand in court. She sounded desperate, as though her bravado was cracking under the weight of actual consequences. And so the house of cards began to tumble. 2 days later, I got another invitation to the HOA board meeting, another attempt by Karen to spin a story, no doubt. I sent Nolan again. I was in my command center, feeding him real-time updates. The room was abuzz with notifications from the compliance team, new findings from the city inspectors, and a flurry of emails from panicked residents who discovered their bills had skyrocketed. This time, when Karen stepped up to the podium, her face was drawn, her voice tight. She tried to defend herself, claiming she'd only cut my power to protect everyone from a possibly dangerous generator. But her words sounded hollow. Residents began to shout over her. "Protect from what?" A man in the third row barked. "You singled out one house." "My groceries spoiled," someone else yelled. "Who's paying me back?" An elderly woman in the front row glowered at Karen. "I rely on electricity for my oxygen machine, and you think you can just pull the plug whenever you want?" Karen's eyes darted around, searching for allies. Many of the usual supporters shrank back, not wanting to be associated with the fiasco. Then Nolan raised his hand. According to the official utility reports, you bypass standard processes using outdated credentials. Do you deny that? She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. The tension was palpable. Suddenly, an older man stood up, tall with silver hair, Edgar, a retired judge. He cleared his throat. I've reviewed the billing changes and the reclassification, he said. It's all legal. The utility company has the right to increase rates when a neighborhood repeatedly violates safety regulations. You gave them cause. Karen tried to cut in. Those violations are just. Edgar lifted a hand to silence her. You had no authority to cut power in the first place. And now the rest of us are stuck with the fallout. I'm recommending a recall vote. The hall erupted in a mixture of applause and angry shouts. Karen looked ready to faint, her face scarlet. For a moment, I considered turning on the lights in my house. But no, let it remain dark, a reminder of why this was all happening. Nolan offered a final line before the meeting ended. I'd like the board to remember, the entire grid is under scrutiny now. One more unauthorized override, and the utility might permanently classify this community under a commercial rate. Think carefully. That night, I decided to take the next step. I had left my power off for symbolic reasons, but the truth was, I didn't enjoy living in a freezing house. More importantly, I wanted to demonstrate that I wasn't the petty tyrant Karen tried to paint me as. So I powered up my system again, only to discover the HOA control panel still tried to flag me for non-compliant usage. A grin spread across my face. They still thought they had that switch. With a few keystrokes, I disabled their entire override capability. The HOA's access portal went offline, replaced by a notice that read, "All further changes require utility-level approval." I gave an approving nod. Then, as the hum of electricity returned to my home, I thought about my next move. Because Karen wasn't one to give up easily. She was cunning, and people like her often doubled down when cornered. Sure enough, rumors soon spread that she was looking for outside help. She told a few close confidants that she knew someone who could hack the grid from the inside. She was too arrogant to realize that my company's systems were built to withstand far more sophisticated threats than a random tech genius she might hire. But the thought still amused me. A new face showed up around the neighborhood, a lanky 20-something in a hoodie adorned with anime stickers. He called himself Kyle, though who knew if that was his real name? He moved with the swagger of someone who believed he could break into any system, anywhere. My guess? He'd done a few phone hacks or jailbroken some devices, maybe read a couple of cybersecurity forums, and now he fancied himself unstoppable. Unfortunately for Kyle, we had advanced tamper detection gear installed in every critical node after the fiasco with Karen's false disconnection. Our teams had placed sensors on circuit boxes, meter hubs, and distribution lines. The moment Kyle tried to pry open a panel behind Karen's house, an alert pinged my phone. I switched on the live drone feed, and sure enough, there he was, crouching behind a bush with a small toolkit. Karen stood nearby, hugging her arms against the damp chill and watching him like some twisted caretaker cheering on a rebellious child. The second Kyle lifted the panel's cover, the tamper sensor engaged. Nearby, a discrete device blinked red, signaling a breach. Almost immediately, the drone pivoted to hover closer. I activated its speaker system, which boomed a flat, recorded message, "Unauthorized access detected. Step away from the power conduit." Kyle jolted upright so violently that he slipped on the wet grass, landing with a dull thud. Karen let out a shriek. They both stared at the drone as though it was an alien war machine. Kyle fumbled to grab his tools, but in his panic, he dropped half of them. He finally scrambled away, soaking his jeans in the muddy turf. The footage was comedic gold. My phone practically lit up with laughter as I shared it, anonymously, of course, with a few well-placed community members. Within hours, the clip circulated online, set to comedic music. Karen's outraged expression became the thumbnail of every local social media post. The neighborhood chat erupted in glee. People had had enough of her nonsense, and seeing her face a bit of comeuppance felt like long overdue justice. Karen tried to spin a story that she was testing neighborhood security. No one believed her. The fiasco only added to her humiliations. If the recall vote had been simmering before, it now reached a rolling boil. Within the week, the HOA gathered for another emergency session. Residents demanded Karen's removal, citing misuse of funds, unauthorized power disconnections, and repeated attempts to tamper with the grid. Karen showed up in a businesslike pantsuit, determined to mount a defense. She began with a shaky voice. "I've always acted in the best interest of this community. It's not my fault the utility company is overreacting. They're a corporate giant." "Stop," a woman in the audience called out. It was Marjorie, known for her exquisite rose garden and her typical neutrality in these meetings. "You tried to hack the system with some random kid. We all saw the footage. How is that protecting us?" Karen's eyes darted to the exit. "I was verifying security, like I said." A man in the front row waved a copy of the cease and desist letter that the utility company, my company, had sent. "We have this in writing. It states that if there's one more incident, we'll be stuck with commercial rates forever. You're bankrupting us with your stunts." Karen's gaze flickered from face to face. No one looked sympathetic. Even her usual loyalists were avoiding eye contact. Finally, Edgar, the retired judge, stood again. "It's time," he said simply. "We have the clause in the bylaws that allows for an immediate recall if the president acts outside legal authority. Let's put it to a vote." Karen tried one last gambit. "I have every right to vote as a resident." Edgar shook his head. "Not when you're flagged as a suspended account due to meter tampering. You don't have an active, valid utility account." A hush fell as the realization dawned on everyone, including Karen. Because her own manipulations had led the utility to suspend her official account, she was disenfranchised. She could do nothing. The vote took place and the tally was decisive. Karen was out. She packed up her notes in a trembling fury. Someone in the back murmured, "Should we all hide our breaker switches now?" A ripple of laughter followed. Karen glared at them, tears threatening to spill, then stormed out without another word. That night, the new HOA president, Dory, a kind-hearted grandmother known for her chocolate chip cookies, reached out to me in private. She apologized for everything Karen had done, expressed hope that the neighborhood and the utility provider could forge a better partnership. She was a breath of fresh air, no ego, no hidden agendas. I liked her immediately. I decided the time was ripe for a gesture of goodwill. Our internal legal team had prepared a thick binder of evidence against Karen, with potential civil and criminal liabilities. I told them to hold off on anything more severe than a cease and desist. Karen was humiliated enough. She posed no further threat. She lost all her leverage. Still, we couldn't let the tampering slide entirely. We finalized the official letter with a Department of Energy seal explaining that any future infractions could lead to federal intervention. That letter arrived at Karen's mailbox the next morning. Drone footage showed her reading it on her porch, then collapsing theatrically into a nearby lawn chair. A neighbor posted a photo with the caption, "And down goes the queen." After Karen's removal, the HOA board underwent a complete overhaul. Dory and the other newly elected members canceled the unfair fines Karen had issued, worked directly with our company to revise the local bylaws, and established a transparent system for handling any genuine power emergencies. The triple rate classification remained temporarily until the changes took effect, but we introduced a pathway to revert to normal rates once the neighborhood proved full compliance for a set period. I attended the next meeting remotely, camera off, letting Nolan be the official liaison. They were polite, attentive, and determined to restore the community's harmony. It was refreshing to see an HOA actually functioning as intended. Plans were made to fix the shady wiring issues, remove the cousins' illegal crypto farm, and ensure every meter was up to spec. Residents no longer lived in fear of arbitrary shutoffs. For the first time since I'd moved here, I felt a genuine sense of camaraderie blossoming. Neighbors spoke with relief about how it felt to be rid of Karen's tyranny. Some even joked about hosting a block party to celebrate. Dory proposed a neighborhood event called Power Fest, a playful nod to everything they'd endured. She asked if I'd be willing to sponsor some eco-friendly backups, like solar lanterns or a small demonstration on green energy. I agreed without hesitation, deciding to foot the bill for a solar generator that could power the entire party. Invitations went out. Word spread fast. People were excited, eager to move on from the drama. The weekend of Power Fest arrived to mild sunshine, a gentle breeze, and not a hint of a storm. The newly energized HO had set up tables near the clubhouse. Families brought potluck dishes, kids ran around with foam bats and bubble wands, and folks admired the solar generator humming quietly in the corner. I watched much of it from my drone's feed at first, smiling as neighbors took pictures and laughed. Eventually, though, I decided to slip out of my house, now fully powered again, and join the festivities in person, albeit discreetly. I wandered the perimeter, talking to a few people who recognized me. They thanked me for setting things right, for exposing Karen's abuses. I waved off the praise. Just doing what anyone would do if they controlled the grid, I joked and they laughed. Near the clubhouse entrance, a small plaque had been erected, powered by the people. Underneath, in tiny script, was an etched note in memory of Karen's outlets. It got a hearty chuckle whenever someone paused to read it. The meltdown had become local legend, a cautionary tale about going too far with petty authority. I spotted Karen once, hovering on the edges of the lawn, wearing large sunglasses as though hiding her identity. She didn't approach anyone. A few teenagers noticed her, whispering. One girl called out, "Hey Karen, you want to cut our power again?" The entire group broke into giggles. Karen retreated without a word, slipping back into the shadows. Not long after, we heard she'd sold her home at a loss to an unsuspecting couple from out of state. She left the neighborhood quietly, no final farewell. Someone snapped a photo of her U-Haul pulling away at dawn, and it circulated in the chat with the caption, "The power has left the building." With Karen gone, real improvements took hold. The board launched a grid awareness campaign explaining how to handle storms or potential outages without resorting to sabotage. Nolan hosted a workshop on responsible energy use. Dory's cookies made every meeting sweet enough to keep people coming back. The once toxic atmosphere had transformed into something resembling an actual community. On the utility side, I made sure the area's classification was restored to normal once they'd completed the mandated reforms. A new digital kiosk went up near the clubhouse, a live display of energy usage showing the neighborhood's solar intake, the daily cost, and even a small feed of citywide weather alerts. The bottom line read, "Managed by you, in partnership with the utility." It was a testament to what happens when transparency replaces manipulation. For a final, playful flourish, I added a small plaque at the kiosk space. Never let someone who doesn't understand the system be in charge of the switch. Beside it was a tiny engraved drone, its camera pointed outward. When residents discovered this little detail, they laughed. Life settled into a new rhythm. People chatted over fences without fear of being reported for minor infractions. The dog park was upgraded. Kids set up lemonade stands. A sense of relief washed over the neighborhood, as though a storm had finally broken and left behind a fresh, calm sky. Sometimes I considered how close we came to letting Karen's petty power plays stand. If I hadn't owned the grid, if I'd been just another resident, would anyone have stopped her? Perhaps not. But that was exactly why I refused to simply flip a switch and restore my own power on that first night. I wanted to show that her tyranny wasn't only about me, it was about every neighbor she thought she could dominate. Exposing her was the only way to free them. Word got around to other HOAs in the region. Some reached out with concerns about their own power bylaws, anxious not to suffer a similar meltdown. My company responded by offering short training sessions for HOA boards, clarifying what was and wasn't permissible. It was a step toward preventing future Karens from weaponizing the grid. In the end, Karen became a faint echo, a fabled villain whose name inspired eye rolls and exasperated sighs. Occasionally, you'd hear a joke. Don't go full Karen on that breaker box, or at least we're not paying the Karen tax. But mostly, people just got on with their lives, grateful the drama had passed. As for me, I finally let my house glow again. Every bulb, every appliance, every strand of hidden wiring that tethered me to the power lines I oversaw. Late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd sometimes sit on my porch and watch the gentle illumination of the street. Porch lights dotted the road, a constellation of little homes at peace. No one was being targeted, no hush of fear over who might lose electricity next. This was how a neighborhood should be: cooperative, not combative. Sometimes I still think about Karen off in some new place, possibly plotting her next crusade. People like her rarely learn humility for long. They just find a new pond where they can pretend to be the biggest fish. But that's no longer my problem. She tried to wage a war of power against the one person she should never have crossed. It's strange how a single flick of a switch can show you who truly wields control. Karen thought she could conquer me with a technicality. She forgot that power, real power, isn't about flipping breakers or quoting bylaws. It's about responsibility, knowledge, and the trust others place in you. And when you betray that trust, you discover that power can just as easily become your downfall.